Welcome to Innovate, Disrupt, or Die, the podcast where innovation isn't just an ideal, it's a way of life. I'm your host and creator of the Innovate, Disrupt, or Die newsletter, Danny Nathan. Hello, folks, and welcome back to another episode of Innovate, Disrupt, or Die, the podcast. This week, I have Mike Todasco with me. Mike, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us.
Danny, I'm looking forward to this. I want to innovate with you and disrupt today. Let's not die. Let's not die.
Yeah, no dying. No dying today. Awesome. All righty. Mike, I'm going to start with the easy question that I ask everybody. Tell me a little bit about yourself, your background, and how it relates to the world of innovation.
Sure. Look, first of all, I'm a father of two and a loving husband. And I started my business life in the glamorous world of accounting way back in the day and literally worked for a paper company like Dunder Mifflin style way back when. But I was always interested in technology. I was always I literally, Danny, in 2003, when I got my first house, my wife and I were just married, got our first house, I got a robot lawnmower. This was 22 years ago. I had a robot mowing my lawn. I was always that guy tinkering and all that. But eventually moved, started my own business, failed miserably at it. It was an e-commerce company. I didn't know what I was doing, but it was an amazing experience.
I have been there.
That led me to PayPal, where I was dangerously unqualified for every job I had in the 11 years that I was there. And the back half of my time there, I was actually running innovation for PayPal. So got to work on a lot of new and emerging technologies. I kind of got all the leftovers. So like blockchain was, something we weren't doing within the company. So spun up the first blockchain group, working on augmented reality and all this other stuff in there. And, so playing with new toys and also like building a culture of innovation for the company. So I did that for many years until 2022. And then left and started just focusing full-time on AI, where I've been part of San Diego State's AI Center, where I'm a visiting fellow and I write about AI and teach and do all this other fun stuff.
There's a lot to unpack there, Mike. Yeah. One, I'm glad you threw out culture of innovation because it's something that I talk about a lot. But before I get into that and dive deeper, you've mentioned AR both today and during our intro call in the context of PayPal, purely because I am just absolutely curious. How did AR rear its head within the walls of PayPal? Because when I think of, financial technology, augmented reality isn't exactly the first place that my brain goes.
And look, most of these things, they never got out of the lab, to be very transparent. But let me tell you about some of the experiments we ran, and that'll give you a lot of a look at that. So we were doing things like facial recognition for payments and so forth. That was one way to use AR. And it's so funny, when we started doing the AR stuff, I always had to explain augmented reality to people. And how I explained it was, hey, that camera on your phone? There's a little box that sometimes goes over the head or whatever of a person or something like that. That box doesn't exist in real life. Your camera is augmenting. Your phone is augmenting over the reality that you're seeing through there. And then, I think within about 6 months, Pokemon Go came out. This was like 2016 or whatever.
And all of a sudden, everybody knew what you were talking about.
Everyone knew what augmented reality was because, literally on the PayPal campus, they're just people walking around playing Pokemon Go for 6 months there all day. And so, but it was things like that. They never made it out into the wild. It was with our Venmo, which was a product of PayPal's. It was for splitting, for sending money to people, and just looking at that. The thought was that these things here are not going to be the be-all, end-all platform, and that there's going to be other experiences. There's going to be glasses. There's going to be whatever, and we just wanted to get ahead of that as a company. Again, none of it actually made it out into the wild. We couldn't get to the place, but those are the kind of things we were experimenting in.
Gotcha. Very cool. All righty. You mentioned during our intro call, Mike, that while you were at PayPal, you deliberately avoided defining innovation for your team.
Yeah.
Can you tell me sort of more about the approach? Talk to me a bit about what did innovation mean within the walls of PayPal, and why did you make the conscientious choice not to kind of define that for the people that were there, that were exploring the opportunities?
Yeah. Let me take you back 2016 when I was starting this job, because the first thing I will say, Danny, is I had no idea what the hell I was doing. Like I had been a product manager and working on some pretty innovative things at PayPal. But PayPal had split from eBay, so we became our own company yet
Uh-huh.
again after 15 years being part of eBay or so. And it was like, well, we had to define all these things, and so I was lucky enough to kind of take on this innovation job and define whatever that meant. And one of the things I got to do was talk to all new employees about innovation. And this was a very diverse group. It was all backgrounds. There's compliance people, there's legal, there's there's us people, there's designers, there's engineers, there's all these people that I get to talk to for 30 to 60 minutes about what innovation meant. And it became pretty clear quickly that the lawyer in the company is going to view innovation very differently than what the designer is going to be. And that
Yes.
we all have a different perception of what that means. And we just wanted to let them know, like, however it was that you define it for yourself, it's okay, but we want you to innovate. So
Okay.
to bring up like the lawyers, like one way that the lawyers innovated, we actually lost a pretty sizable merchant account. And one of the reasons why was because we couldn't be fast enough with a lot of the sign offs and all that. I think we had
Mm.
like 70 pages or something that their counsel had to read through and sign off on or whatever. Like the other company was just like, somebody else just came up and said, like, yeah, no, you don't need to do that. Just do this. And like all else equal, that was one of the big deciding factors. And we're like, this is a competitive disadvantage. So how do we turn 70 pages and make it into one?
Mhm.
And that wasn't, we would talk about that on the same level as the things that we were building and the products and the patents or
Right.
whatever else, like, because like that's a huge process innovation that we would have. So we would have like innovation days, we would have all these kind of things within the company, but like we never put like strong, strict definitions around those things. And everybody kind of gets, you know, what innovation means at a high level. And as long
Mhm.
as they know that that's okay and that's encouraged, that is then something that we would instill throughout the people in the company.
That's fantastic. Mike, what was the experience like educating and encouraging folks in roles like legal or finance? Is kind of a different ball of wax when you're talking PayPal, but roles that you don't generally think of as sitting at the core of innovation efforts. Was it challenging to sort of get those folks on board, or were they excited to have the opportunity to consider things that either in other roles or other organizations, whatever, they might not have been able to?
You got 20,000 employees there. We're trying to define this.
Yeah.
The last thing that I ever wanted to do was focus on the innovation resistant people within the company,
Okay.
where I wanted to put most of my time on effort on the innovation curious
Yeah.
people. Because if you get that 10 or 20% out of 20,000, that's, 2 or 4,000 people, you get them doing this, you give them the attention and recognition and all that, you're going to start to see the other people up the ladder want to do things like that,
Right. It
more
gets
so.
that flywheel going and you get people looking around going, oh, that guy's doing something
Yeah.
interesting. How do I
Yeah.
get to do that?
I mean, and that's the thing. Like, you never, like, if you're building a product, never focus on, okay, who's not using the product. Focus on who's using the product and how do you make
Right.
this even better so they become your biggest evangelist for what you're doing. So in the finance, we bought these robots and I just bought like 5 of them. I was kind of like, hey, as long as you're going to use this, I'll send it to you. Who wants it? Just give me a proposal. It's yours. Um, and the person that raised their hand was somebody on the finance team.
Wow.
And he was like, "Yeah, can I do something on this?" I'm like, "Do you know how to do this?" He's like, "No." I'm like, "Well, do you want to work at this?" He's like, "Yeah." Like, "Okay, this is yours." And 7:30 in the morning, long before I ever got into the innovation lab, he would be in the lab and he'd be toiling away at stuff. And he'd be building a
That's
team. He'd be
awesome.
doing all this other kind of stuff. And what the hell did that have to do with finance? Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. But it was teaching him a totally different skill set. It was showing
Uh-huh.
whatever's possible. And so he got this thing working, and I forgot what he even built, but like he would have it going around the campus, the PayPal campus, and people would see this PayPal branded robot and be like, well, that's cool. Wait, a finance guy did that? And it was pretty amazing to start to just build that culture. So I think that was really important to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I can totally see where that would inspire a lot of other people. Mike, you've hit on this idea of a culture of innovation a couple of times now, and to be frank, most of what you're sort of describing and discussing sort of falls under the umbrella, in my mind, of building that culture in terms of how you give people the permission to experiment and to try weird things and to learn something that isn't related to their core purpose within the business. Talk to me a little bit about what a culture of innovation means to you and how you sort of went about that over the course of, I think you said it was 5 years in the innovation role at PayPal.
It started before I had the job. I mean, to be completely honest, Annie, like I was sort of lobbying for this job before the job even existed.
That was actually my next question, was how did the job come about? So if you want to kind of weave that in, that's great.
I got into this whole process of like just learning about patents and filing more of them on other ideas, on other concepts. And effectively what a patent is, it is to be able to explain a technological concept or an idea that no one's ever thought of before. And I would like literally lead these brainstorming sessions within PayPal, just doing this on my own. I had a day job. I would do that all the time. I did that for years. And finally then, and I just loved it. So I was getting all these patents, all this stuff while I was still doing my day job. And it was super fun, interesting. Like, you know, the company loved it and everything else as well. So then when we're splitting, I had the opportunity, like basically one of the things that happened is half of the patents went with eBay, half of them went with PayPal. And there are all these lawsuits. Apple was suing Samsung. All these patent lawsuits were going out, and we're like, crap, we're a small company relative to all these. We're losing half our assets. We need to rebuild this portfolio. How do we do that? That's when I raised my hand and said, like, hey, I might be able to help with that. You know, I've been doing for the last 3 years with all that. And that's what, so innovation moved into technology, started off in legal. So I was actually on the, with all the lawyers doing that. And that was just kind of the evolution of that.
Interesting. So you started as part of the legal team. I'm picturing, you know, you in an office or at a desk amongst a bunch of lawyers. Were you getting sort of the side eye of who is this guy and what is he doing in the legal department?
Yeah, totally. I mean, look, I got that a lot. Like even before the innovation job, this in my entire career, my entire life, I've always kind of got at the side eye. One of the things I did was I never actually took a desk. So I never sat with the lawyers or anything like that. I actually gave up my desk in PayPal in years before that because I was hiring somebody. They didn't have room for a desk. And so as a good boss, I'm like, you got my desk. Like the last thing I want you to do is come to the company and not have one. I don't need a desk. I will work out of my backpack. And I did that for the last 9 years, I think, that I was at the company. I just worked out of my backpack. But eventually I was able to commandeer our innovation lab. And what the heck commandeer that? I convinced somebody in facilities to take a conference room offline. And then I just started stealing furniture from across the campus that nobody else seemed to be using. And if they would complain, I would give it back. And if not, I would just take. And so like, that's how we built out the innovation lab. It was a couple $1,000 total, but it was mostly just like anything that, and eventually people started donating stuff to me. Because they're like, hey, like I remember actually the head of legal was like, hey, I got this chair. It doesn't match my office. I'm like, I don't give a crap. Just I'll take it. And she was happy to
send
give
it over here.
Yeah.
What was happening within the lab? Was this a place that was staffed with an innovation team, or was it more of a like a transitory waypoint for people that were looking to try weird things and experiment? Like what was the purpose of the lab once it became established with stolen furniture?
Much more of the latter that you just described there. Like for a long time in PayPal, like innovation was just me. Occasionally I got like another person or I'd get an intern or whatever. It was me and a whole bunch of just ambitious volunteers who wanted to build cool stuff and have cool conversations. Anything, I would just constantly try experiments to build community and to build just this, you know, this culture of innovation within the company. And I eventually stole TVs. So we would do like on Thursdays, a thing called TED and Breakfast, where I would literally go to McDonald's across the street, buy like a whole thing of like Egg McMuffins and hash browns, just kind of throw it out there and people could kind of come and go and watch TED Talks. And that would lead to these discussions and all that. And it was really just all about building a community. And it was totally fun because we would just have these people from all different backgrounds just coming in and out, and people would bring friends, you know, hold events. Like one of the greatest hacks, Danny, that I ever found out was don't ever spend money to like bring in somebody as a speaker. Find those same people who have a new book coming out. say that you're going to buy 100 or 200 copies of their book, and if you live somewhere more remote where they're not doing part of the book tour, that might be harder. And pre-buy those books and just say, okay, come on your book tour. When you're in San Francisco, just come down for an hour and I'll interview you on stage and give out the books. That was the greatest hack ever, because you to
That's
spend
awesome.
$100 on books, or sorry, buy 100 books, $20 each or something, that's $2,000.
Yeah.
Some of these people charge like $25,000 to do speaking.
Right.
And plus I get to give out all the books. We get to then have like a book club meeting as a company about those books after the fact. I get to meet with cool people on stage and do one-on-one type sessions. We videotape that. We send that all around.
Absolutely. Mike, I love the story about the hack, and it actually segues nicely into my next question, which was, what other recommendations do you have? So, you're describing your evolution within PayPal into an innovation leader. For anybody who's listening who is in a similar kind of spot where maybe they're not even in an innovation role, but they're trying to establish the culture and the opportunities you're describing it, what advice would you give them?
Start small. Start small and experiment like crazy is what I would say, Danny. So just start from the ground up around something that you are personally passionate about, that you also think is going to benefit the business. I mean, that's the Venn diagram that you want. In some way, AI is going to help your business. You're passionate about AI. Putting those two things together, that's a great
Right.
thing to start off with. Then set up a Slack channel or a Teams channel with like AI sharing. And what you're doing is you're building a community as part of
Yeah.
that within the company. And that is just going to start to get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Interesting. So, Mike, starting small, how did you then grow the innovation capability within PayPal over time? And what did it look like sort of by the end of your tenure? I mean, how had your efforts changed the role of innovation for PayPal?
Wow, that's a great. It's one thing. I never tried to be too introspective on this in some ways, and in part because I never had to. And
Right.
let me just add one thing. I would go to some innovation conferences with a lot of other people who were running innovation teams like me or whatever it might be. And a lot of that always came up was like, well, how do you measure ROI? What's the
Hmm.
return on investment of what you're doing? And I would always tell them like, it's me, so I don't have to worry about ROI. Like I'm one line item on there and it's all this other person, like time and anything like that. Like, yeah, if I wanted to grow this into an empire, if that was my goal, that would be more of an issue or a problem. But I never had to worry about that because I always kept it small and manageable. I frankly always did things that I knew the CEO would like. We could talk about that a little bit later, but like, I would always like kind of get on their radar with some of the really cool stuff we're doing. So it was never like, if there was any cost cutting, like what we were doing was never even a thought. So that's one thing that I would say to people, like the smaller you start this thing, the more constrained that you are, like the more freedom and leeway you're going to actually have to do. For building out the culture itself, like it's fun. Like, you know, so while we had this mandate, and I've talked mostly about like culture of innovation as a
Hmm.
company, we would have a leader come in and say, hey, we need to be doing something in blockchain. Can you actually build out a blockchain team? Here's some money to hire some engineers or something to do that. So that was another thing, which I haven't talked about at all, that we would do within the company. And
Okay.
it's fun with that because like now, like PayPal has its own stable coin, and that released 2 years ago. And we started the work on that back in 2019 and like work on the
Hmm.
original papers and efforts in that area and so forth. So like we do see that kind of stuff as well. Um, but like, the culture of innovation should, like, it's a brand new leadership team now. And I haven't actually been there in like 2 years. So I don't actually know what's going on fully.
Right.
But I do see some stuff in the product side of like, oh yeah, like I remember that. There are things like that too.
Nice. Nice. Talk a little bit more then about the efforts of building out new teams and new capabilities. I guess what I'm sort of the underlying question that I'm driving at here is, it sounds like a lot of your initial innovation efforts around PayPal were, as you've described, establishing the culture of innovation, helping people understand that they have permission to be innovative and to think about innovation as a part of their job. But then at some point, I'm assuming that kind of the rubber hits the road, if you will, and there's got to be an output from those efforts as well. And what I'm hearing is that the output was, occasionally new teams, like a blockchain focused team, for
Yeah.
example, that came together. How did that process work? And then, you go to build a blockchain team, you hire a few people. Like, how did that team then go from being a brainchild of, the innovation department or Mike or whatever into becoming a standalone functional team that operates without, the need for your oversight specifically, so that you could, at least as I picture it, then go back and refocus on building the culture and whatever that next team might be?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's almost two phases in this, Danny. So I think like the first blockchain work we were doing was long before I had that blockchain team.
Okay.
And we would do things like we would have, couple month-long hackathons and things like that, where people might get to work on a project and we'll have a certain problem statement or whatever it might be. And then we would do things like, so PayPal's main campus at headquarters is probably like 3,500 people. So there's some pretty big rooms that they have in there that could hold
Yeah.
a couple hundred people. And, I would say, hey, we're going to work on a blockchain theme, something related to blockchain. Anybody in the company can build, anybody could do whatever. Here are the parameters. And here's a whole bunch of VPs that are going to see the final pitches of that. And then I would gather a whole bunch of people, say, hey, 2 months from now, can I get an hour on your calendar to do this, to evaluate, to do that? And we would do this. And frankly, this was one way to get people excited because
Yeah.
especially a lot of the people involved in innovation were earlier in their career, don't have as much exposure to some of the more senior people in the company.
Okay.
And this more senior people in the company get to see like kind of fresh, brand new ideas that are coming from throughout the business as well. And that was really exciting to do that. And frankly, it was also planting a little bit of a seed within those leaders in the company, because then they
Mhm.
would start talking about that and so forth. So probably the first blockchain things we did was like 2015, 2016 in that time frame. So when strategically as a company, they're starting to say like, hey, maybe we should start to do stuff in this space. How do we test that out? Um, I would be one of the first people that they would go to with something like that. And so
Gotcha.
with blockchain specifically, it was one of the senior leaders within the company said, hey, like, do you think you could build out a blockchain group? We could do these tests. For that, we did have a very specific goals and criteria that we wanted to meet over time. That was a little bit different because it's like, okay, I'm actually giving you this chunk of money. This is not innovation money. This is not to hire authors. This is to hire engineers to do this. And these are the tests. And this is how we're going to meet every month and talk about progress. And these are the goals that we want to reach. And all of that kind of stuff is part of the process. So I think it was very prescribed. But it all started with planting seeds. I mean, again, any kind of new emerging technology, and we've talked about augmented reality, robots. We haven't even gone into machine learning and AI type stuff yet. But like
Well, that's where I'm
all of
heading
these
next.
things where
So
we were doing other experiments, sessions where we're just like kind of putting people on stage, being flamboyant, being out there and just kind of showcasing the talent that we had within the company.
yeah, Mike, it's interesting as you're describing this. I'm thinking back to my experiences during sort of a similar time range, and I'm going to ask this question fully aware that this may be a me question and it may be an environmental question, but I sort of have a sense that during the time period you're talking about, so, 2013, 2016, early 20s, that there was more of an excitement and a willingness in the technology community in general to share, to present, to get on stage, to wax poetic about ideas. And I sort of have the sense that today things have shifted more into an entrepreneurial perspective where people
Hmm.
still have the same ideas, but they're driven by the potential of, to put it bluntly, starting a company and making money off of those ideas, as opposed to potentially sharing them and building community around them. And I guess I realize that's not a question. I guess my question comes down to, am I crazy, or
Yeah.
do you see some of that yourself? And then if so, do you think that the culture and the community that you're describing from then could still thrive today?
Yes, in one specific area, but I think you're probably right, Danny. I think that there is a lot of that today, and I think I might be having a harder time launching some of those things that I said today, with one big exception, and I think that's AI.
Yes.
Because I think in that world, that is the perfect example of something where anybody can use it. Anybody can benefit from it. When I started at PayPal, I worked with a lot of machine learning engineers and I saw a lot of cool demos and all this amazing stuff. And I couldn't do any of it because I wasn't
Right.
an engineer myself. I couldn't do
Right.
that. And then fast forward 2021, I had my first experience with GPT-3, which was, the predecessor to ChatGPT and all that. And I remember typing stuff in there and I was working with their playground tool and having it just kind of spit out like a story, spit out whatever it was, and like literally like screaming because I'd never seen something like this before. I'd seen engineers do stuff like this. I'd seen, we have a customer service machine learning team that would do all this weird stuff with like learning from this and then, it could spit out stuff as a chat bot and all that. But like, holy crap, I was able to do that. And I'm not an
Right.
engineer. And that was so damn eye opening for me that I was just giddy at the time because 99.999% of the world is not machine learning engineers. They are regular
Yes.
folk like you and me who, can talk, can speak, can do whatever, but that like was an unlock for everybody else. So today, I mean, everybody on a board level, on a senior leadership level, on a individual manager, a middle management level, they're all thinking about how can we use AI more effectively? How can we use that better? In everything that I've described here, that is what I would focus on. I would just say, like, okay, even if you're a seasoned company using these tools, there's still opportunity here. But most companies aren't seasoned. Most companies are just like, hey, they talk about AI on CNBC. I don't know what the hell
Right.
to do. And be the person that's starting that movement within your company saying like, okay, let's go and figure this out. We're going to spend $20 a month on enterprise, Claude Sonnet 4.5 or whatever, and just have this. It's not a lot of money to do that. We're going to start sharing all this stuff in a Slack channel. We're going to set this up and we're just going to start running experiments in some sandbox of all the amazing things that we might be able to do. And 80% of those things are going to fail, but 20% of those things are going to be really damn interesting. And we're going to want to start to get the interest of leadership starting to look at that. Like today, that is something that I can't imagine a company that isn't going to embrace from an innovation standpoint. You
Right.
doing something like that.
Right. Interesting. Mike, that's a great transition too to what you've been doing over the last few years. We've talked a lot about PayPal and your innovation role there. Tell me more about what you're up to, since that sort of aha moment with GPT-3 and how your focus has shifted into the AI space, and then perhaps how your innovation background has influenced the way that you view the experiments that you're doing with AI.
Yeah, it's a great question. I've been fascinated by these tools, these AI
Hmm.
tools, is just being able to heighten human creativity so much. This is the really exciting thing to me about these tools is that they're going to enable people to do so much more with them. And that is going to open up a lot more creativity as we start to be able to figure out like what these things can do. There's going to be a hell of a lot of AI slop. Like, don't get me wrong.
Yes.
There's going to be just like garbage just kind of being thrown out there, but it's going to be more customizable, more personal. Like, I would love to make a documentary series about my family and, about like the history of our family and things like that. And, it'd be hard to do today, but I bet you within like 3 or 4 years, like that's going to be doable and that you're going to be able to
It'll
have a
probably
Ken
just
Burns
happen for
style
you at that point.
documentary about your family lineage and all that. You could all sit around a TV and watch and discuss and
Hmm.
all that. We're like, you couldn't do that before. And like, that's going to be possible now.
Interesting. Mike, remind me of your current title,
Yeah,
please.
yeah. Sorry, I totally went off. I have a problem not actually answering questions, Danny, that
That's
you asked
okay.
me. You're asking what
Everything
I'm
that you're
doing
saying
now,
is
and I just
interesting,
start
so I'll
to
let it slide.
but that's a lot of what I do. So I'm at San Diego State. They have an AI center there. It's been around for about 10 years. I'm a visiting fellow, which means I get to write about AI stuff. I get to teach. I get to and just run a hell of a lot of experiments. I do research in that. Current research I'm doing is perceptions of creativity in AI, just how people
Oh, interesting.
perceive AI created works versus human created works, and what the difference in perception that humans have
Is
of
there
those
anything you can
works. So
share
like
about
that's
your
the kind of stuff
discoveries
I'm
there,
getting
Mike?
right. Sorry, go ahead.
Is there anything you can share about your discoveries so far about the perception of creativity?
Yeah, we're not published yet, but I don't think I'm supposed to talk about it, but I don't care. I'll talk about it anyway.
Okay.
Look, the hypothesis I had. So here was the experiment. We basically give an AI generated story to 300 people. Half of the people are told that it's AI, and half of the people are told that it's written by a human that doesn't
Okay.
exist. So to the best of your knowledge, you have that, and then we have you rate those stories. And the hypothesis was the people who were told that it's AI are going to rate it lower overall. That's not quite the case. Like what we're
Interesting.
starting to see, and we just got the data last week, so I'm still kind of
Okay.
playing with it, but it seems like the hypothesis was probably wrong, and that it really does seem that we're actually looking, at least for this form, on almost equal footing between the two. Now, like, that's the great thing with research, like, it's going to beg so many more questions, so many
Yeah.
more studies. But it just seemed kind of counter to at least the narrative out there that everything that AI is garbage, everything AI is slop, people hate AI. At least in this study, I haven't seen that so far.
That's really interesting. Part of what's so fascinating about what you're describing, Mike, is I guess, the difference between who we view as everyday people versus professional creators, for example.
Mhm.
And, part of what you've been driving at is AI's ability to increase access for the everyman to a creative outlet, to something that can formulate an idea based on the way they describe it, for example, that they might not have been able to illustrate themselves or photograph themselves or edit
Yeah.
together into a video themselves. Whereas, and my sense is, and certainly the data that you're describing would seem to indicate that people are okay with creative help in that regard. But then when you look at professional creators who I think are perhaps more vocal about, looking down on AI and trying to protect their own IP in terms of how it's used for AI, have a very different perspective. And again, this is
Yeah.
me hypothesizing and I have no data to back it up. But, there's sort of an interesting dichotomy there. And I think it'll be interesting to see how it unfolds over time and whether AI really becomes more a part of the creative process or whether we maintain that divide between the everyman creator and the professional creator
Yeah.
and the way that they use AI. So
Yeah.
I don't know if
Look,
I have a
I mean,
question buried in
is
there, but
things become democratized, the people who kind of know the secrets and the keys to that.
Mhm.
And look, especially if you're also making your living doing that, you're going to be more resistant to that change than somebody who is casual about that. And I
Right.
think that's one of the interesting things we're finding out. And probably in this study, we didn't actually ask this question, but just playing the odds, none of these 300 people that we asked in the survey were probably professional writers.
Mhm.
I'm guessing if they were professional writers, they would have maybe felt a little bit differently and a little bit more passionately. If you might react more negatively to an AI created podcast, I may react more negatively to an AI created whatever visiting fellow who teaches or something like that. Like I think that is a natural human reaction we will have to all this. But like, it's not going to change. I always look at historical parallels for this kind of stuff, and just what people have said over time to different advances of technology, like photographs, for example. Like there was an argument you couldn't even copy a photograph or copyright a photograph, so you couldn't
Mm.
get legal protection for a photograph because the original argument was like, well, that's literally you are just capturing what the world
Yeah,
is
it's a thing that
from this
exists.
thing, and then like, why the hell should you be able to copyright that photograph? And that didn't hold up. We're like, well, no, but there's an art to it and so forth. And you know what? We still have artistic professional photographers. We have professional photographers at weddings and stuff like that. There are all these kind of things, even though 4 billion people have a camera in their pocket at all times
Right.
versus 150 years ago there were 1,000 people that had
Right.
a camera. I mean, like, it's completely changed. And I think what you're going to see is, especially for smaller creators, especially for more independent creators, especially for more entrepreneurial creators, and they're already starting to look at like how I can use these tools to do so much
Hmm.
more quickly, how I could quickly iterate, and just experiment with things again and again. Honestly, just as a amateur creator, I have so much fun with it. But I think it's just the natural reaction of any kind of technological advance that you're going to see this. A great example, I will say, is if you go on Disney Plus, there's a series called Lights and Magic, I think is the name. It's about
Okay.
ILM, which
Yeah.
was a George Lucas company, Industrial Lights and Magic. And one of the things you see is, so it's a special effects shop. And you see the pivot when they go from practical effects, like the first Star Wars, like literally the Death Star scene, and all that. Like this was made by putting together like model pieces and
Right.
gluing this together and all this other stuff, and going from that to digital effects. And when you saw that in this movie back in the 1980s, all the practical effects people were like, "This is crap. This shouldn't happen. This should be." And do you know what's like? Within 5 years, like either they transitioned over to the digital side or they did not. And like that was kind of the change in the
Yeah.
world that we saw. And I think we're going to be seeing a very similar pivot right now.
Interesting. Yeah, I agree, Mike, and I think it'll be incredibly interesting to sort of see where it nets out. Are there any particularly surprising discoveries about AI or our relationship to AI that have come out of your research, Mike?
Well, my research has been very hyper focused on that. But let me
Okay.
talk maybe not out of my research, but just kind of the research more broadly. The thing that actually keeps me up most at night about AI is AI companionship. And I actually had an old professor of mine. His name is Sam Apple, and he wrote something for Wired just this past September, and it was a great piece. I highly recommend people read it. And it was all about AI companions, and he basically had all these people who basically have AI boyfriends and girlfriends,
Hmm.
and they came together, and it was right that it was a very level, like kind of both sided part of this.
Interesting.
And it was very well written, and it part of me is so frightened by that for society because you can't compete with AI. We are naturally inclined to anthropomorphize things, which means
Hmm.
we see human traits and things where humanity does not exist. This is just how we work. But the surprising thing, so that's the unsurprising thing to me on
Okay.
that. You asked the question, Danny, what's the surprising thing? There was a podcast I listened to recently called Science Versus, and it had an episode about AI companions, and they kind of followed somebody in this episode. The interesting thing to me was the episode actually ended in an oddly positive way where, like, after 9 months of being with this AI companion, the person was just like, yeah, I'm done. Like, and that
Huh.
was it. There was no drama. There was no else. It's kind of like, yeah, I've done
They
it. And
broke
like,
up.
maybe our wiring is such, if it's so sycophantic or whatever, like it's just not natural for us and we don't do that. Like, I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know, but like this is ultimately we're going to be asking ourselves the question, like, do we want to live in the matrix or do we want to live in the world that we have today? And I think a lot of people are going to choose matrix, and I don't think
Yeah.
that's a good thing. But like, that's something I'm very much trying to put my grab, try to understand and grapple with, like
Yeah.
every day.
Yeah. It's so funny that you bring that up too, Mike. Have you seen the sort of social commentary around friend.com and their device?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So I've seen it because they've been running a massive advertising campaign around the New York subway system.
I've
And
heard.
being in New
Yes.
York, I have seen the ads. And it's so funny because, usually I just sort of ignore the subway ads and I go, oh, cool, there's a movie coming out or whatever. This was one of the few where I saw the ad and it literally, I think the ad was friend.com in big text with a picture of the device. And so I immediately, of course, went to the website and kind of went, what is this? Like, from a
Yeah.
technology perspective and an AI perspective and a human perspective, it's so interesting. And I think that as that becomes more normal, the tolerance for it is going to change, and we're gonna sort of see those who will and those who will not. And so I'm curious to
Yeah.
see where that nets out. Last couple of questions for you. First off, is there anything that I haven't asked you about that either you're dying to share or that you think would just put a really good kind of cap on our conversation here?
God, you've covered it all, Danny. I mean, look, the thing that I would just summarize all this to mostly focus on the innovation side of things for people who are really interested in the innovation side, like just take ownership. Just be intrapreneurial, if you will, like the entrepreneurial within your own company. Just do that. Just do it first and don't ask for permission is honestly what I would tell people to do that. Now, do that within reason. Like, don't oh, I'm going to download all the customer data. Like, don't be stupid with it.
Right.
Like as you're doing it, but like to just be able to do this and just start that movement within your company. Like if it's not happening, like be the person that makes it happen. And that's what I would say, like, just like be that person within the company. Some people ain't going to like it. Your boss might not even like you doing that. But then, it just means you probably need to find a new boss or potentially even find a new company. But just start doing that within the company if you have that desire and drive. And if you're the person watching this podcast, I hope you do. So just do it.
Awesome. Yeah, I hope more people feel inspired to take action on it. Awesome. Mike, where can folks find you if they want to keep up with your research and your ideas and all of that fun stuff?
LinkedIn is the one social network that I'm actually active on because it's the one that bores me after about 5 minutes of being on it because the other ones are too exciting for me. So I'm on LinkedIn for 5 minutes a day or so. And I'm like, okay, I'm good. But yeah, that's the best place. Just Mike Todasco on LinkedIn. And people can DM me or anything like that. I will be more than happy to help them out in their journeys or response. Like I love doing this stuff and talking about this stuff.
Awesome. And you also have a Substack, Artificially Intelligent Conversations?
Yeah. So it's Substack, Medium, or LinkedIn. Any of those three. Gotcha. I post in all three of those places. You can see my newsletter about AI stuff. That's whatever's interesting to me. And I try and write in very simple terms as best I can.
I love what you've written, Mike.
Things and bring them down to earth. Yeah.
Yeah. I love what you've written. I have it open here, which is part of why I had the title ready to go here. But I mean, Google built an AI for kids' books and I used it for corporate propaganda. I love it. That's fantastic.
Yeah. That was fun. I did that one recently. I think the most recent one I did was how many people has ChatGPT killed?
I saw that one too. Yeah.
And so that was like literally going into the data of just seeing like, okay, like what is the environmental impact? What is all this other kind of stuff that and it's a little bit attention grabbing, but it's fun, exciting, weird stuff, but it's all AI related if you're into that.
Awesome. Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. I love hearing your stories, and the evolution of innovation at PayPal has been a fantastic learning experience. So thank you for joining me.
It was a pleasure, Danny. Thanks for having me.
That's it for today. Thanks for tuning in to Innovate, Disrupt, or Die, the podcast. Join us again for our next episode, and don't forget to subscribe at innovatedisruptordie.com. That's all, folks.